Hello, I'm Mike Lewis Kennedy. I'm one of the co-directors of the National Young Writers Festival this year. I have just brought us our first technical difficulty of the festival, which is wonderful. I am here for a panel this evening. I'm going to be chairing. It is called Is Music Just Attention-Seeking Poetry? This is about the very specific art of writing for music and writing lyrics for songs. It is a great pleasure for me to be here tonight. Unfortunately, we were going to be joined by a third panelist who is going to be chairing, Charlotte Kerr. Unfortunately, Charlotte's not able to make it because she has exercised her civic duty with the Pfizer vaccine, and unfortunately unable to be here because that is the price we pay for public health. But thank you very much, Charlotte, and you should tune into her other events because she really is a stunning writer. I am broadcasting today from Gadigal country. I would like to extend my respects to their elders past and present and all other First Nations people in the unceded lands of this continent. And I am also incredibly lucky to be joined by two fantastic musicians and songwriters, but I will leave it to them to introduce themselves.
Hi there, I'm Jack Colwell, and I too am broadcasting from Gadigal country today. I am a singer-songwriter who put out a debut album last year called Swan Dream that was produced by Sarah Blasco. I guess I've been writing confessional narrative type songs for, I don't know, a really long time now. Yeah, I'm also a big Tori Amos fan. So that's a little bit about me.
And I'm Oliver John Cameron. I'm a composer first, but also songwriter. I've written musical theatre stuff, and I also write kind of as a solo singer-songwriter as well, and collaborate with other musicians, including Jack Colwell. So yeah, hi Jack.
Hi, nice to see you.
So music's a bit of a new frontier for the National Young Writers Festival. We tend to have focused more on sort of text and screen and things like that in the past, but this year we have a couple of music events. Before we jump into the thick of it, I just wanted to ask, is music the only thing that you write, or do you write in other art forms? Let's start with Jack.
Well, my foray into the arts is pretty checkered, to be honest. Not a lot of people know this, but I went to a classical music high school, and then when I left high school, I actually went to the National Art School and did a degree in paper sculpture, where I spent my final year hot glue gunning cardboard together in order to get a 51 and leave and never make art again. And since then, I've continued to dabble with visual art, thankfully. And since then, I've purely stuck to writing music, but I have also started writing some short stories that are in collaboration with my music, and I've written some brief sort of stuff for film before.
And how do you find that process? Do you feel similarly in the way that you write music to the way you write other things? Is it a similar creative process for you?
Yeah, I mean, I think something that I really enjoyed, something that I really like about writing music is the immediacy of writing music. Like when you play an instrument or when you put words on a page, you can activate that work kind of immediately. And it kind of reminds me of, when I was at art school and I was doing drawing, or, even like doing a longer form of work. Like I really like that you can activate the work very quickly. And especially, I'm kind of going through a phase in my life right now where I maybe want to be on social media less, but during a period of time where I was very on social media, I also like that you can share that work straight away, like be it a song or a piece of writing, and kind of get feedback on it immediately. So yeah, I love the immediate action of music and of writing lyrics and longer forms of work.
And what about yourself, Ollie? Do you write anything outside of music and lyrics as well?
I guess looking at, music theatre as a form that takes a lot of components and have being written, I guess text that is like or scene work or dialogue outside of the specific songs. The focus for me has mostly been the songwriting part, but I think that, in terms of stage direction and kind of having a vision for what that would look like when performed, and the necessary additional kind of notes that need to come with that. But I've been, that's again kind of reverse, like in the same way that Jack's saying, he's writing short stories to accompany. I think that it's been beneficial for me to try and work on my, the brushing up the writing skills, prose, description, the parts of, just writing without music to help along the lyric writing as well. So I guess if that answers the question, I do write outside of the box as well, outside of that particular box.
Absolutely. So we jump into the first explicitly music-related question. It's a bit highfalutin, but that's what we're about here. So I would ask you, do you think that lyrics and musicianship are in competition or complementary? Does the musical, as in the instrumental element, distract from the lyrics? Can the lyrics distract from the musical element? How do you achieve synthesis? Let's start, Ollie.
Yeah, I think they can absolutely be in competition. I don't know if you want them necessarily to be in competition, but it really depends on the particular artist's work. I think for me, writing mainly like music for other people to perform, not necessarily for myself. It's actually a requirement in terms of the orchestration, like the selection of instruments that I'm working with, or the way the voices work together. It's always a consideration to make sure, particularly with choral music, that the text is audible if I want it to be. The message needs to be clear, and so in that way, it is possible to overwrite or be so obsessed with having musical layers coming in and out or overlapping and making it really complex, polyphonic, but therefore actually losing the meaning of the words and not making that clear. And when going back to early music, I suppose, where maybe the actual line of text is quite simple and everyone already knows what that is as well, that doesn't matter so much. But when you're actually trying to give that meaning across, it can become confusing. So but that's not to say there's definitely styles of music that maybe that's the desired effect. I'm not sure. But also I think that composers will, or songwriters will, organically weave their text in with the melody. It's sort of part of their process. It shouldn't be engineered too much. It should make sense. If you're the one that's singing it, at least. I don't know. I'm curious to know, Jack.
Have you found that in your own practice, Jack?
A music and lyrics competing. Interesting question. I mean, you know what? To be honest, I guess I've never really thought about that before. I've never really thought about the music and the lyrics as being separate. I've always thought about them kind of having to work together in some way, but just the way kind of always changes that the music and lyrics work together. I mean, I would kind of say that probably for most people, when they listen to a pop song or music, they're actually not really listening to the words at all for a long time in the song. They're just kind of listening to the fricative sounds and the way that the words work together, the chukka chukka fricks, the sort of sounds that create rhythms and patterns that kind of draw you in. But I would say that music kind of has this undeniable emotional quality. As soon as you color a word or put a spotlight on it with a certain chord or a tone, it can really change the meaning of that word or that sound. And I think I mean, for me, I've never really thought about them being in competition, but it's how you use the music best to serve the words. With like the current work that I'm writing at the moment, I mean, I did a writing course, well, sort of, I did a talking about art, writing about art course recently to help me kind of get into writing some longer form songs that are kind of less concerned with, you know, repetition and having a chorus and having repeated phrases. They're more like about telling a story, almost like a poem or a narrative over music that accompanies it in some way. And for me, I've begun a practice where I write out my story first and then I add the music second, which is something that I haven't really done before. But when I'm doing that, for me, the words and the story is really important. And when you tell a story through song, you often don't have to have and, if, but, them, they. You can kind of suggest an idea or like an image. In fact, I would actually say that if you put in too much information in the same way that you might in a story sometimes, although I've never written a successful short story, but I would say that that could be detracting in a song because you're giving the audience too much information. And I always feel like a really successful song allows someone to place their own meaning and ideas into your lyrics. And there needs to be a kind of vagueness in the words for that to happen sometimes, unless it's about a very, very specific thing, which is a very difficult song to kind of write. But the main thing I think with words and music is actually the intention behind the words and the way that you perform it. I think that you can have the most beautiful lyrics on the page and the most wonderful music in a score, and they can seem to marry themselves so well in this context. But actually, until the words and the music are performed, or even I guess you could think about it in the way that like maybe some poetry also has to be performed, until you do that performance and you say the words with intention in a certain way to someone else, the act of connecting and the intention behind saying that really fills in the gaps. And I think that is when the music, I think that is either when you will know your music and lyrics are working or in competition in each other in a way that doesn't seem to work. You need to have that aspect of live performance and intention in there.
I think it really depends on the style of music, like, I mean, and the purpose, as you touched on, like the intent, but also like totally with context. I think it's like, you know, I guess looking at music theater, or even like, you know, the particular show that I've written with, like focusing on Pauline Hanson, like historical facts and figures and trying to get a lot of exposition out, and it almost taking on kind of a spoken word quality at times, because there's just so much need for the information, and you don't necessarily, like, well, at least for my intent, you know, wanting to brush over or lose meaning, hopefully, in telling that story. But it's totally up to the artist, right? And it's totally up to the purpose of the song. It's like, you know, there's no one answer here. Like, we're a pluralist songwriting body here. Yeah.
And you touched a bit on this yourself, Jack, when you were talking about the process of writing music and lyrics separately and the order in which that happens. But what about you, Ollie? In your practice, what tends to come first? Do you write the music first or the lyrics? Or does it change?
I think sometimes it's lovely when it all happens at the same time, but usually I would say, at least, well, for the theatre stuff, I start with pun. You need a good pun, a good like hook in that sense that like is kind of going to be able to center the song around. So it's almost like having the title first, which is kind of unusual, I think. But I think that's usually when I know, like, oh, I've got like the one line or couple of lines that are going to kind of get to the real heart of what this song is supposed to do. And then usually then it's about going to the music and then coming back to the lyrics. So I don't know again, I speak to that particular practice and that particular style of comedy more. But I've found when I've attempted to not write comedic songs, but actually write serious songs that are maybe a bit more personal, it tends to be kind of a combination. I think that there's, you know, so much, like, and I practice writing, you know, most of my music that I've written has not had any lyrics whatsoever. So it's kind of been a more recent thing to combine the two in a serious fashion. And I find it very liberating in a way. Like, it's, you know, it's actually kind of nice to be able to have to put into words. Like, it forces you to express what the music was supposed to be saying in the first place, I suppose. And as I guess Jack touched on before, I'm obsessed with I like the assonance and like the sonics of words as well, and finding ways to make that flow into the work. And I guess that is a form of, yeah, poetic writing. It's interesting. I don't know. I feel like I answered the question with all of the above there. So
yeah, I don't know. Maybe it's a rudimentary example, but that sort of like focus on phonics and assonance kind of reminds me of songs like "I Am the Walrus," where the sort of experience of listening to the song is more about the shape of the words than what they're actually saying.
Yeah,
totally.
Yeah.
And I think that's so true. Like, there's, I mean, that kind of era of like psychedelic / like absurdist, it's almost like a Dadaism in lyrics, where it's like the lyrics don't matter, but they're telling a story which doesn't necessarily make sense. But then some of these songs like are so like well known and loved and have stood the test of time almost because they're cryptic and perhaps mean nothing, but also speak to something so human and accessible at the same time because they don't say anything. I think that's really fascinating. Yeah.
And
But
I
yeah.
just have. Oh, sorry. Go on, Jack.
Well, I was going to say to that point as well. Like, I think that's such an interesting point to make, and something that is so true as well. And I guess it does kind of make me think that the musical cushioning around those words provides it with, like, I guess, an excitement or an emotion, and then that becomes like very quickly like a nostalgia if you're kind of listening to that song, because like music is so powerful. I guess almost like smell or something, that if you're at an event and that song or piece of work happens to be playing, that it will bring you kind of back to that time. I think another really good kind of example of like an "I'm the Walrus, I'm the Eggman" kind of lyric is like "Wonderwall" by Oasis, for example. Like, Wonderwall isn't actually anything. Like, it's nothing in particular. And I've watched a documentary. I've watched a documentary about writing that song, and I forget which brother it was, Liam or not, one of them, they're always fighting, described that Wonderwall wasn't anything in particular. He just came up with the word because it sounded really good in the song. And for some reason, it reminded him of the feeling of love in that moment. And then I realized that I'd actually never stopped to think that Wonderwall wasn't anything in a song, because the song was so popular. And then when I first heard it, I was always just like, oh, well, Wonderwall is a great song and it's kind of nostalgic and it feels like a love emotion. And then when I thought about it, I was like, well, yeah, it was like a Wonderwall is nothing like this, like, but it could be something. Like, I could make it whatever I want, but it's that emotional cushioning that kind of brings that this new idea or this new thing to life, I guess.
I think that it's good. I mean, both from the music and lyric angle, and I guess we're focusing on it from a very like much listener and writer, like, you know, we're creating it, but like almost the space that exists between the creation and then the listener, like if there is room to move there, I think that can make a song really popular or really interesting, because it forces you to want to engage potentially. So the music is really important in that regard. If it doesn't necessarily lure someone in, but like, you know, there's an element of mystery or unknown. I think I said it before, like a cryptic element to the composition in some way. The thing that, you know, the thing about a song that makes you want to like listen to it again straight away, because whether it like the lyrics came in on a different beat to what you expected, or a certain instrument came in at some point, or a layer that just like changed the way you felt, like, and gave you that rush in that moment. Like, there's so much, like, it's so complicated and there's no formula for it. But I think that it's good to go into writing a song knowing that, you know, not necessarily trying to perfect it or fill in every space, but allowing there to be something that is going to be open to interpretation in some way. And
yeah,
that's interesting.
Yeah. There's this idea that I think of sometimes that, I mean, for the use of this conversation, songwriters, but maybe all writers in some sense, are researchers, and whether it's like you go to a library and you research and then come back, or you go out into the world and you experience life and you research that, and then you kind of come back and you show what you've researched, and you kind of present your experience and your emotions to the world through different lenses. Like, it kind of makes me, when I think about songwriting or writing in that way, it gives it like a noble importance that makes me, I guess, strive like harder with my work to write and to show through music and lyrics the experience of life, I guess.
On that note, I had a question for you, Jack, specifically about Swan Dream. So if you haven't listened to Swan Dream yet, our National Young Writers Festival audience, you should absolutely go and do it. You can find both Ollie and Jack's work on Spotify. Look it up. Swan Dream is a really beautiful, lush, like instrumentally rich album. It's also like quite emotionally powerful. We're talking a lot about the process of writing songs and lyrics in a very sort of like singular oriented position. But I would say that a lot of musicians who write songs for like modern markets actually write them as part of collections rather than as single songs. You might release a single from an album, but often you write big groups of collections together, like, you know, LPs, EPs. Yeah. When you were writing Swan Dream, did all of the songs that you originally wrote make the cut? What were your reasons for leaving some behind, if you did leave some behind? Like, were they thematic reasons, musical reasons? What went into making the selection?
Well, yeah, Swan Dream, my debut album. Well, writing the record, I'd kind of already had about 3 or 4 songs that sat together thematically. Swan Dream was actually one of the first. So Swan Dream is the title of the record, but Swan Dream is also like a kind of a mythic tale that is told at the start of the record, almost like a prologue. And the words are, gosh, what are they? One day soon I will wake and be a swan, just like when I was a child and I danced. Sorry, that's how you would sing it. And I danced for my reflection. I'll grow 2 wings. You'll never see the frightened child I used to be. Ta-da. And to me, Swan Dream is a story of queer transformation. And it's actually kind of based a little bit around this psych book called The Velvet Rage that I wrote, that you know, that as a queer child, you dream of becoming this idea of perfection in some way, and then you arrive at this point in time and you realize that this idea of perfection or this dream is still yet beyond you. So it's kind of this idea that the swan dream, your final form, the final boss that you will ever fight, is actually kind of unattainable in a way. It's always within your grasp. And then the record also deals with themes of domestic violence and of my own queer identity. And there's a couple of breakup songs in there for good measure. But when I came up with that myth and that word, Swan Dream, again, like Wonderwall, is not a real word. It's something I made up. Thank you, Gallagher Brothers. I had 3 songs that fit together really well. And I was really lucky after going on tour with Sarah Blasco that she invited me to record an album with her. She was like, Jack, I really like your work. I would love to produce this. And I met with Sarah at her house every Wednesday for about 2 or 3 months after I'd done some writing myself. And Sarah was like an amazing editor because she really forced me to think about what my songs were about and what my lyrical intention was. And I would say that when I've written a song in the past, I've tried to make a song about too many things. And actually, Sarah reminded me that I guess like a poem or like a good work, that a song should kind of be about one idea in a way. Like the world of the song you should be able to hold in your hand. And sometimes you go outside of that world and then you come back in. I think the hardest type of song to write in the world is a song that kind of appeals to everyone, because you're kind of talking to so many people. And I'd say the songs on Swan Dream, they address very specific personal issues to me, but they're personal issues that are kind of political in a way, that speak to my politics, I guess. And when it came time to pick the 12 songs that made it, the things that were of concern to both of us were that we didn't want to have songs that were about too much of the same theme. So originally there was like another 2 songs in there that also dealt with like internalized homophobia, and there was a standout one called Weak that kind of ended up going on the record. And so those 2 were immediately cut because they kind of dealt with the same thematic idea. As well as that, when you have a body of work of 12 songs, it becomes really clear if you're listening to the whole work, just in the way that a musical structure works, you don't want to have the same kind of intro, chorus, verse, chorus, blah, blah, blah. I mean, I would say that there's probably a lot of albums being released this very day that all the songs are kind of in that structure, and maybe it doesn't matter too much. But because of the artists that I really admired, PJ Harvey, Tori Amos, Patti Smith, Bob Dylan, Smashing Pumpkins, those sorts of artists, their records are filled with different types of songs. They're filled with chorales, they're filled with pop songs, they're filled with like a late night piano bar kind of sound. It's really important to have different moods and different structures and musical ideas, like a trio if you want, in your wheelhouse, because I think it only adds to the variation and dynamic in the broader spectrum of your work. And then lastly, it was really important that the songs that I put on the record, which the record is quite lush, as you said, Mike, but when I was workshopping with Sarah, our rule was that I had to be able to play the songs on my own at the piano, and that song had to withstand me performing it from beginning to end without any other instrument, without any other input, because there's a mode of thought that if your song and your intent and your performance and your lyrics, etc., can be convincing and engaging from beginning to end without all the bells and whistles, then that is a great song. And that is something that I have really, really held on to and taken with me in my path as, I would call myself a musician, I guess not an artist, but in my path as a musician, because I feel like so many great songs that came before, they were played time and time again. Like, it was very natural for people to do covers in the 60s or 70s and do, not like, I wouldn't even call it a cover, I would call it an interpretation of that song. And I really think it's because during that period of time, what I would refer to as the Golden Era of Songwriting, that the songs were so well written that they could be performed by anybody who kind of had whatever voice and any intention and really make that song work. And I think that people jump in too much and maybe put too much importance on other sounds, or they lose the scope of what the song could be about. And it's actually at the detriment of the song, because the song should always serve the song at the end of the day.
Fantastic. And I think it absolutely does do that. Like the music in Swan Dream, like, really kind of like sings as it is, like, on the record, but also, like, I have had the good fortune of seeing it live as well, and it absolutely is, like, beautiful just as a person at the piano as well.
Thank you.
Ollie, you are in the process at the moment of sort of branching into more songwriting stuff yourself? I know you've written a lot of classical music in the past, given your background in composition, and also written for musical theatre, but recently you've started branching into writing more sort of pop music and art music and other things along those lines. When you're writing things, do you tend to think about them as collections as well? Are there links between them in real time, both thematically and musically?
I think so. I mean, even if they're linked by a period of time in which I'm like focusing on those particular songs, I've tried to look kind of after a couple of months or whatever and gone, oh, what is it that what am I feeling? What sad thing am I focusing on that's linking all these things together? But I think also because, as Jack mentioned, the artists he likes kind of influence the type of music that then he writes. Like I think a lot of the artists that I've been drawn to across styles, and maybe even the fact musical theatre is linked by a concept. Like I love a concept album. I love a single. I love a good song. But if an artist releases an album that, you know, overall I can listen from beginning to end and go on a real journey musically and lyrically, I love that. You know, that's my favorite thing. So I think that I'm always trying to think, and I get to, I guess, do that in my own sense, like in releasing an album of like solo stuff or anything like that. But a lot of the stuff I've been recently writing, you know, it was an interesting process because I wrote it as solo songs, again, almost as like an exercise, a bunch of sort of sketches last year, kind of during the lockdown and coming out of the initial kind of, I guess this year is a completely new year, but like a whole other story, at least on the East Coast. But looking at the like last year and the kind of general angst that existed, and I was trying to kind of reflect on some, you know, my personal experiences and, you know, growing up queer and kind of reconciling that with like a real love of like early choral music and this sort of like conflict, I guess some kind of dissonance that existed. That's a good choice of word there. Dissonance that existed between the like content of, I guess, the music that I really love singing, and then my own kind of feelings towards that period of my life. And so it was interesting to find that kind of thematic link after the songs are sometimes written. But yeah, they started as solo songs and weren't really, you know, for any particular purpose. I'd just written them and then I turned them into choral pieces, actually. And so all of these I's had to become, you know, use or more collective, because I was like, well, these are actually songs that should be sung by a group of people. So I had to kind of rework all the lyrics away from speaking specifically to me and my like angst in my little, you know, journal, and not for the world to see, to something that was actually going to be a little bit more or palatable to sing as a group. And I'm looking forward to, hopefully in the next, I think in the next couple of months, there'll be a virtual performance of that collection of lullabies, I ended up calling them, because I felt they were all pieces that touched on a different kind of element of, you know, these feelings and this kind of love of this music, and then like looking at it again through like different eyes, and not just of a queer lens, but of a I guess just modern, youthful, young person looking at the kind of bleakness of the world. But then going back then to the original idea, which was to then like perform them live as a solo act, I think it was really good because I'd already done this whole reworking of them as choral pieces, and then to go back to it as solo pieces again. And I think they were all the stronger, like this process. And it felt very unusual, but it actually, I think, was really good for the songs, like a kind of self-workshop between these two different perspectives. And so yeah, I don't know if that answers the question, but I think it's interesting, like, you know, that it's being able to see your work as a malleable object that can be transformed and reimagined, and whether you're taking on a persona or a character, or you're stepping into the shoes of yourself as a younger person version of yourself, or you actually see the value in not wallowing necessarily in that younger version of yourself, but actually kind of going, okay, but where am I now? And like, how do I actually respond to those feelings that are probably quite old feelings and maybe don't need to be dwelled upon? Like, it was really interesting. Or like, how is this maybe more broadly applicable as well. Like it's all been worthwhile, I think. So yeah, hopefully companion releases at some point, the choral and the solo, who knows, we'll see.
It's funny you say that. I feel like music has an edge over a lot of other types of art, where it can really transplant you back into like an emotional state that you've had in previous parts of your life. Like nothing makes you feel the angst of your teenage years like quite as acutely as listening to music that you listened to in that time, or even music that relates to how you felt in that time. This is a bit of a bridge away, but on the topic of music that really speaks to you, who are your favorite lyricists and why? So we'll start with you again, Ollie.
There's so many people I could say. I know who Jack's going to say, so I won't. I won't steal his thunder on.
No, you go. Please.
Well, I was going to say Tori Amos, but I must say Jack has like converted me on Tori Amos, and I love Tori Amos. I'm as a lyricist now. But I think probably someone who owes a lot of reference to a lot of influence to Tori Amos is someone like Regina Spektor, and more like old, early Regina Spektor, which I really loved when I was like a teenager, and I still go back to, just because of the kind of, as I was saying before, like drawing you into these very strange stories sometimes that are very compelling in their kind of meaninglessness, and I remember always loving that. But I also really love Hayley Mary, or the Jezebel's lyricism as well. I think that in terms of cryptic and mysterious, and like I spent many hours kind of trying to decode with other friends, like, what does this mean? And I love that about the lyrics, and I think the imagery in the work, like in the songs of the Jezebels. I'm a huge fan of their work.
And what about yourself, Beck?
Well, yeah, I mean, it is true. I'm one of the Southern Hemisphere's greatest Tori Amos fans. It's true. And I think, to Ollie's point, I think Tori does write really cryptic and emotional lyrics. And, in the early era of the internet, which I was a part of, there were many GeoCities sites formed just to decode and try to make sense of Tori's lyrics in some way. And when I began songwriting, which was in my teenage years, artists like Joanna Newsom and Owen Pallett and Patrick Wolf were all really big artists, writing very kind of cryptic and colorful lyrics. And when I first started my practice, I definitely tried to do that as well. Like, I actually think some of my earliest songs that I've written, I don't really know what I'm trying to say. I think I'm just trying to sound smart and really like use a lot of really big words. And I think about those songs now in my early 30s, and I think like, I don't really get what I'm trying to say there. And that's not really to say that that's anything about Tori or Joanna Newsom, but I would actually kind of say that my taste in lyrics has changed over the years. And when after doing the workshop period, I found something really freeing in kind of being a bit more direct with my lyrics. And I would say that it's probably people like Patti Smith, or actually even Courtney Love from Hole, who is like a very underrated and direct songwriter, particularly on the Hole debut album, Live Through This, which is like a really raw and powerful record. It's I would not say it's an easy listen, but on a song particularly like Doll Parts, which is like the lyrics are so direct and simple, but really abrasive to listen to. And I find the rawness and the direction where you're not beating around the bush and you're not kind of being cryptic in any way. It's that direction and confrontation through lyrics that I kind of find most exciting the older I get. And I wonder that if, as a young artist, the stuff that I wrote and enjoyed in lyrics more was because I wasn't kind of ready to confront those deeper parts of myself yet. And now that I am and have, the direction speaks to me in a different way. So yeah, Courtney Love and Patti Smith, but of course, always a place in my heart for Tori Amos.
I think that's so interesting. The fact that it changes over time. Like, it's so true. Like, particularly, like, if you discover an artist like at a particular age and wherever you're at with, in regard to your identity or your life, and something can really speak to you in that particular moment. Like, I find like an artist like Perfume Genius, like, is an artist that I really liked for some reason, but didn't really thought about the lyrics that much. But then the more I've kind of focused on certain lyrics, like, just the simplicity. Like, I think it's maybe, again, the musical styling. It's very like slow. Like, most of the lyrics are kind of stretched out, and there's a real like indulgence, meditative quality to the way that the words are said. And or like in the way that like Sufjan Stevens, like, it's always quite softly spoken most of the time, and so like you could easily like just lose the words, like they kind of whisper away, like. But when you sit down and actually concentrate, and like, I don't know, as you get older, like the meaning can completely change to you. And or songs that like maybe slip you by on an album that weren't the single suddenly become really, really like special. Mitski is probably a recent artist that I find the directness also quite cool. Sorry to jump back in. I just love so many.
No, I mean, I think it's such an interesting point, because I think a direct lyric almost seems like really confronting in a song, especially if you know, like I love bands. Like, sadly, I probably still listen to the Smiths about 3 times a week, even though Morrissey is an absolutely horrible person. And yes, there's probably someone who's going to phone Lifeline immediately for me and saying that I still listen to the Smiths. But I think that having a really direct lyric, when you know a solo artist's story and when it's about their story, it feels kind of shocking when they kind of break that fourth wall and reveal something so personal. And I guess to that point, Ollie, like, I feel like everything I used to listen to or try to write and enjoy, I guess, seemed very like singly or poppy or 3 minutes or like less time or like wanting to repeat words and blah, blah, blah. But I feel like my life and my artistic life is an exercise in slowing down in a way. Like, I feel like my lyrics are longer, my songs are longer. I feel more comfortable having a presence in my writing, and I feel more comfortable kind of taking up space. And I guess if you look at many artist trajectories who have careers over 20 or 30 years, I mean, we've talked about Tori a little bit today, or even in a sense Courtney Love, I guess it's that idea of becoming more comfortable and feeling like you don't need all the extra things to kind of get your point across, other than 3 chords and the truth sometimes.
And one artist that I find really disarming lyrically, I think it's kind of like what you were saying about how sometimes lyrics can be simple, but I don't want to say confronting, but really drive at something that's very like poignant and personal. Is FKA Twigs. I feel like some of the music that she writes, like take for example something like Cellophane, can feel very exposing, both of her and of you, while you're listening to it. And I think that's a really interesting place to take your audience, like if you can achieve that sort of thing. We're almost out of time, but before we wrap up, I just wanted to ask you one final question. It's a bit pithy and we've sort of covered it already, but just in a sentence or two. What do you think music can do that other forms of writing can't? So let's start with you, Ollie.
I don't want to put down other forms of writing. I think, it's like a fine wine with like an expensive dinner. Like, there should be a music pairing for every book. I don't know. I think that music, you're playing between the lines, basically. Like, you have so much control over emotion, and you can give across so much subtext, both through playing with expectations or reinforcing expectations of a particular, idea. working with a genre within a style that, you know, is well known or well established, or you know, trying to subvert that or create your own original, you know, style. Like, there's so much that you can do. And, you know, if you, yes, it can be 3 chords on the truth and you can do that. But if you're, you know, someone that's interested in like the orchestration side or the production side, you know, you can do so much. I mean, we didn't even touch on sampling, and that whole world. But I mean, look, it's kind of like an impossible question to answer. Like, you're combining forms. It's interdisciplinary. So like, you've got more power, but also like you've got or different powers, I suppose. And again, it depends if you're writing for other people to then perform, or are you producing it yourself, and there's that like the end product. So, you know, it's just giving you a whole other palette of unspoken things to work with, which is interesting. Yeah, so it's very different.
Yes.
Yeah, I mean, yeah, I guess too. I don't really want to lift up music at the degradation of other art forms. I mean,
By all means, do it. Burn the books. No, I didn't say that. Sorry, go on.
No. I mean, I guess Ollie touched a lot on the power of the emotion of music, and I would say, I mean, something I don't talk about a lot is how I do come from a classical background, and I always feel that classical music, particularly like orchestral music in the 19th century, it has this amazing ability to change emotion very quickly, and some of those emotions that classical music can produce, I don't think that we really quite have words for in the English language. I think that the feeling and nuance in the movement, contour, and creation of music can sometimes leave you speechless. And I think that that is like an amazing thing. But at the same time, I think music as a whole, music is a great collaborator with other art forms, and it can help other art forms find light and sometimes meaning. I mean, a single word, as I initially said, can have a whole universe and emotion around that world once a chord or something else is applied to it. And I always think that music, I just think of music as being a great friend to other art forms that kind of helps it see the best. And in return, other art forms are also a great friend to music, like visuals and those sorts of things. It's the collaborator and friend when you need it, when you use it correctly. Music is just such a wonderful thing. I've thought about giving up music 2 or 3 times now, probably once a year, but there's something inside of me that loves music so much I can't help but return to the joy and pain of it.
Well, on the topic of collaborators and friends, thank you both very much for joining me today. It's been wonderful. Yeah, fantastic to see both of you, and for this wonderful chat. Please make sure to tune in to the rest of the festival to see Jack and Ollie on other panels, and have a lovely evening. Goodbye.
Thanks.
Bye. Thank you so much.
Bye.